So in our last video, what was supposed to be a simple inspection turned into the complete and total disassembly of my cheap 5.3 for my C4 Corvette. Now, since we broke this thing down, I have located a good 24 tooth crank to replace the one that the thrust surface was completely worn out on. I have cleaned every nut, bolt, washer, and crevice that I could possibly find on this engine block. I ended up doing it with engine cleaner and a pressure washer. But the real hero is my wallet, because we ordered a lot of new parts for this thing. Bearings, rings, gaskets, head bolts, oil pump, you name it, it's on its way. Before we jump into that, last thing that is left over in this block are the cam bearings. So I want to knock those out real quick. I have a new box ready to go in. All right, so I don't remember if this is the Jegs or Summit LS specific cam bearing tool, but I have it all the way through. All right, in between the webs, we have that machined puck that's on the end inside the cam bearing. So now I'm just going to play the song of my people on the end of this with a hammer, and we'll knock the bearing out. So the first one doesn't look too terrible, maybe a little bit of copper showing. I've definitely seen worse, and to be completely honest with you, I've run worse, but we're going to do the rest of them anyway. We've got all of our old cam bearings out. Now, this appears to be a factory bearing. I don't know if you could see it in there, but the factory GM bearings are almost like swedged together. So after I knocked those out, I just went through each cam bore to make sure that none of them were scored as I knocked them out. So they all look good. I cleaned those up. We're going to put the new ones in tomorrow. It's a little late to be hammering on the tool right now. All right, so our second new set of cam bearings are in. Yep, I said second. I tried doing this yesterday after work. I was frustrated. It was hot. And a couple of the bearings did not make it out alive. But thankfully, second set of hands here. Steve is always good for that. We got the new set in. But there is one more thing we're going to do before we're done for the night. All right, we are going to chase all of the cylinder head bolt holes. Now, ARP sells a tap specifically for it. This is 11 millimeter by 2.0. So although you can get that in a standard tap, they're generally not as long as this one. So I'm going to go through all of the bolt holes, clean everything out. And then we have a custom made one from a factory head bolt for those small bolts up top. So I'm going to run through all these, clean these all out. The whole reason for this engine coming apart was the thrust tolerance was way out of spec. So I have laid the main bearings in the block, and I've put our new crank in. It's literally just resting on the bearings right now. No assembly lube, no oil, and I'll show you what we're going to do. So, new crank. As you can see, the thrust surface there is nice and clean. All new main bearings. We're going to put the thrust main cap on. We're going to torque that to spec, and then we are going to push on the camshaft again with our dial indicator installed in the front here, and hopefully we're within, like I said, 1.5 mil to about 0.008 of an inch. And if we are, then we're good to go. Then we can pull this back out and start measuring our bearing tolerances. So I'll get this set up. I'll set the camera up again so you guys can see once we pry in the crank and see how much thrust we have now. All right, so our main cap is torqued. I have the dial indicator set up on the end of the crank flange. It's zeroed out. So now, just like we did last time, I'm going to pry forward, all right, towards the dial indicator, and we'll record our measurement. Hopefully you guys can see that. We're sitting at about 0.004 of an inch, which is exactly where we want to be. So now we know this is within spec. Thankfully, the new crank and bearings fix that issue. Okay, now that we know that our thrust is within spec, I'm going to take our main cap off. We're going to pull the crank back out. I'm then going to reinstall all of the main caps with the bearings, torque those to spec, and then we are going to take measurements basically of the outside diameter of the bearing in 3 spots. We're going to record all of those, and then we're going to mic the crank separately and compare. And the reason for doing this is we're just checking bearing clearance. So you don't want the bearings too tight and you don't want them too loose. Basically, once oil gets pumped into these, that crankshaft is actually going to ride almost on like a fluid film of oil. So you want to make sure that those specs are very, very close. Typically, for every 1 inch of journal diameter, so basically how wide your bearing is, you want about 1/1000th of an inch, give or take. So like I said, pull the crank out, reinstall the main caps with the bearings, and then I'll show you how we're going to measure everything. All right, so what we're going to use to measure the ID of the bearing surface. Now again, I have this main cap torqued down to spec as if it had the crankshaft in it. This telescoping gauge is basically when you loosen up this little thumb screw here, you'll see those two extensions, all right, kind of step out like that. So I'm going to basically shove this, not shove it, but we're going to place this inside of the bearing surface itself. Now the first position I'm going to check is going to be straight up and down, or 12 to 6, basically like that. Once you get it in there, tighten up on that and just pull back and forth just a little bit. You want to make sure that's perfectly straight up and down. Have a little bit of drag. All right, once you know that that is nice and tight, making contact on both ends of the bearing, we're going to tighten up our thumb screw. All right, again, you want a little bit of drag against the bearing. All right. So now that is the exact inside diameter of our bearing. And now we're going to read this to an outside mic and record the number that we get. Okay, so now we have that in between our mic, and I am reading 2 inch 561 thousandths. So I'm going to record that, and then we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to measure across here and then across here. And we're going to basically average those 3 measurements, but we're going to do it for each main. And then we're going to mic the journal on the crankshaft as well. And the difference between, so this number hopefully should be larger than the journal on the crankshaft, and that's going to tell you how much bearing clearance you have. So I'm going to do this for every main cap. All right, so it is a little time consuming. I'm not going to bother filming every single one because frankly, it's a little boring. If you've seen it once, you've seen it more than enough times. So I'm going to write everything down. Once I'm done, we'll turn the camera back on and we'll go over what we found. And hopefully this thing should be within spec and we can get to assembling. We're going to take our main caps back out. We're going to put the crank into the block, and then we're going to torque everything to sequence. Now, a little bit earlier in the video, you saw that I took some measurements. So we measured in 3 different spots on each bearing with a micrometer. And then we compared that to the journals on the crankshaft. So with this block currently, we have about 0.003 of an inch bearing clearance on all of our mains. We have about the same on all of our rods. So I am pretty confident that when this goes back together, it's going to spin freely. It will make oil pressure and hopefully won't make a lot of noise. So let's start breaking this down. We'll grab our new crank and slam it in. All right, literally the worst job in the world. All right, we are torquing torque to yield main studs. So the first pass we did was 15 foot-pounds on both the inner bolts and the outer studs. All right, second pass was 80 degrees of rotation on the inside bolts. And currently we are doing 53 degrees on the outside stud. All right, who wants to see something really satisfying?
11.
All right, so now everything is torqued. Yeah, all 80. Pay attention now. Listen up. Nice and smooth. I can't wait to spit the bottom end of this thing out after we shove 20 pounds of boost through. It's, you know, right through the mouth. Looking forward to it. But
we're going to find this crank on Sunrise Highway.
Yeah.
We're going to drive right over it.
All right, so just because I am paranoid, all right, we checked our thrust again with everything torqued. Now, with just the thrust bearing cap torqued before, I had 4 thousandths. All right, now currently we're at about 3. So we are well within spec. All right, again, this turns over nice and easy. Very happy so far. So I'm going to pull the dial indicator off. I think we're going to spin the motor around. Probably going to throw cam and a new timing set at this thing next. But we're kind of running out of daylight, so that might be the last step for tonight. But let's get that going. All right, cam is going in now. You may have noticed we do not have the plate on the back. We're going to get to that later. But for now, we want to get the timing set on this thing. So
we may get that.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Who knows? We may just leave it out. So Steve's going to slam it home.
I am going to slam.
Yeah, I offered him the water pump bolts that are the same thread, but he insisted on the long flathead screwdriver. So, you know.
Using my jailhouse shiv.
Yeah. Who am I to make his job easier? All right, well, Steve, or when Steve is done screwing around over there, he's going to put the oil diverter valve and the rear cover on. While he's doing that, I'm going to put the new cam plate on. This one actually has a gasket. If you remember when we took this engine apart, the gasket on the old one was completely flat. So fresh gasket, new hardware. We put that on, torque everything down. All right, so Steve buttoned up the rear cover. All right, we have our new billet diverter valve in there. So this gray thing that's currently shoved in the timing cover is a, well, it kind of serves 2 purposes. It will locate the cover itself, and then you can also use this to press the rear main seal in. Obviously, after you pull it out, once we get it off the hoist, we'll put the rear main seal up against, and then you just kind of smack this with a hammer, and that will install the seal. We're leaving it on there because when we pull this off the stand to bolt it to the transmission before we swing it in the car, we want to make sure that we do not forget to put the rear main seal in. Not that either one of us would ever do that or have ever done anything like that before. It doesn't sound like either one of us.
Throwing the seal in the garbage.
Yeah, so that's why that's staying in there. But now the cam cannot fall out of the engine. All right, we have the front cam retainer plate and the rear plate on the block. I think the next thing we're going to do is start getting the pistons and rings set up, which we have to file fit the piston rings. So we're going to spin this over and we'll get started on that. All right, so next step is to start to get our pistons and rods in the engine. And before we do that, we're going to take our set of file fit rings. And what we're going to do is we're going to put that in the bore. All right, we're going to use a piston to square the ring, basically get it straight in the bore so it's not crooked or anything like that. And then we're going to take feeler gauge, and once this is inside the bore, we're going to measure the gap in between the end of those rings. Now we are going to open these up a little bit more. All right, this engine and car is it's going to get a turbo. So because of thermal expansion, you pump more heat into it. All right, these will start to grow, and you can actually force this ring out of the ringland on the piston, and it will actually start to either touch the two ends together or expand enough where you'll break a ringland on the piston. So because of that, what we're going to do is we're going to set the gap on our top ring to about 24 thousandths. Second ring is going to go to 28 thousandths, and then the oil scraper or the third ring we're going to leave alone. So we're going to do all 8 of these, and then we'll start slinging rods and pistons in. All right, so we have our number 1 piston. All right, all together we have the oil ring, second ring, and the top ring. Again, 28 thousandths gap on the second, 24 thousandths on the top. One thing to keep in mind, and Steve actually pointed this out to me, take a look at the instructions for these, because there's actually a direction for which way the oil ring is supposed to rest in the piston. So make sure if you're doing this, keep an eye on that. And then the other thing, which I did know about because I did it on the engine in the Camaro, but sometimes the rings themselves will be labeled either top or will have a dot on there. So the second ring is labeled. The first ring is not. It can go either way, and it says that in the instructions. And these happen to be Hastings rings, so just keep that in mind if you're putting one of these together. But first one is done. We're going to get the other 7 completed, and then we'll bring you back when we're ready to sling these things into the block. All right, so all of our rings are filed, assembled on the pistons. What we're doing right now is putting the timing set together. This way we can still kind of spin the engine over a little bit easier, rather than having all 8 rods and pistons in there. It's on there dot to dot, little blue Loctite on the bolts. We'll send these to 26 foot-pounds, and then we're going to start dropping rods and pistons in. All right, so right now I'm just taking some ATF, cleaning up the bores just to get any grit, dirt, anything like that out of there before we start sending our rods and pistons in. All right, so we have a bit of an assembly line going on here. I'm basically lubing up the ring lands, loading a bearing into the rod, handing it off to Steve. All right, and then he is basically knocking it into the bore. And then once we get all of these done, we'll go on the underside. We'll snug all of the caps, and then we'll go through and do our torque sequence for this as well. So like I said, just lubing up the ring lands, and then we are staggering them as well, even though in theory they should be spinning while the engine is running. We have all 8 rods and pistons in. What I'm doing now is going through the torque procedures. So these are torque to angle, not torque to yield. All right, there are some arguments that you'll see online that these can't be reused. All right, torque to angle, not torque to yield. So initial torque spec is 15 foot-pounds, an additional 60. So I'm going to 15 foot-pounds with my standard micrometer style torque wrench, and then I have a digital one over there that we used on the bottom end. We'll swing that to 60 degrees and should be done in a couple minutes here. All right, so we got the new oil pump on. All right, windage tray is going on. That's the rear.
Where it says rear?
Yes.
That doesn't sound right.
And then in addition to the bolt that holds that to the oil pump itself, all right, there are a bunch of companies out there that sell these little braces because there is a second hole in that oil pump. So we're going to put that on the other side, and then I'll kind of just clamp down on this piece evenly. And hopefully we don't have any oil pressure issues. Steve got mad at me for torquing everything, so now he's just doing it by feel.
I'm just cross-threading everything else in the engine.
Yeah. Little Alabama Loctite. So it's been a few days since Steve and I finished up the bottom end on this engine, and we were about to bolt the cylinder heads on. We were going to go through, lap the valves in, and from looking at the cylinder heads, we decided we've come this far. They were a little questionable, and I'll show you what we're talking about right now. So this is actually after trying to lap the valves in. So the seats weren't in the best shape, and then the valve guides looked a little crusty as well. And as much as I tried to clean them up, they really didn't come back as nicely as I thought they would. So I got these off of eBay. All right, the cylinder head shop, they just got delivered 20 minutes ago. So open these up and I'll show you what we got. Now the factory castings were 862s, which is a pretty common truck cylinder head, 5.3, 4.8, whatever the case may be. But let's open these up and I'll show you what we went with. So we went ahead and ordered a remanufactured set of 243 casting cylinder heads. So if you know these engines, 243 was the casting offered on the C6Z06. Some of the early LS2s that were, or all LS2s were cathedral ports, but they got them, and then the all aluminum 5.3 that came into some of the pickup trucks got these as well. So they flow a little bit more than the generic head casting. Valves are a little bit larger, so it should be a nice little upgrade. But the only thing that we have to do is, because we put an aftermarket cam in, I have to go through and we have to take off all of our old valve springs, and we are going to be installing, pack 1218s. So we're going to do all the valve springs on both cylinder heads, and we should be able to get some more progress on this. All right, so I have my spring compressor tool on. All right, we're going to compress these down. We'll use a magnet, pick the locks, and replace the springs. So old springs are out. I'm going to put these off to the side so I don't get them confused. I'm going to grab two of our upgraded springs and do the same assembly but in reverse. Now you can put a little bit of grease on these as well if you want them to stick. I'm going to risk it and probably have to do this over again. All right, so two springs replaced. All right, the valve stem seals were all brand new in here from the person that remanufactured them, so not too worried about them. So we'll go through, we'll do the rest of these, and then we'll bring you back when we're ready to bolt these onto the block. All right, so with all of our valve springs swapped over, we'll install our new head gaskets, get everything torqued down.
Trying a new theory, no head gaskets at all.
Yeah, we're just going to torque it down as tight as we possibly can go. Basically until the studs get loose, then back it off once a turn, and it should seal up pretty well. So these are MLS gaskets from Michigan Motorsports. These are meant for small bore engines, 4.8, 5.3. Brand new, so we're not going to put any copper spray on them or anything like that. Put them right down, put the heads on, and then we'll actually start putting the head studs into the block. All right, so we're going with head studs for this particular build. All right, and the instructions state, you basically thread this into the block by hand. You do not apply torque to it. You do not apply assembly lube or anything like that. So we're going to start, we'll get all of our fasteners in, and then we will go through the torquing procedure. All right, I'm not sure what Steve's doing over there, but we're going to keep making progress. So we're going to apply some assembly lube, all right, to either side of the washer. Get a washer on all of our studs, get the nuts on there, and we'll start going through the torque spec.
I am going to try and slow us down as much as possible.
You're doing a fantastic job.
I'm the best at what I do.
So you want to make sure that you get this assembly lube on both sides of the washer. So basically the bearing surface of the nut, all right, on both sides, side where it makes contact with the nut, side where it makes contact with the cylinder head. All right, without this lubricated, you'll lose about 50% of your torque. Right, just due to friction. So assembly lube on both sides. We'll get these all on, and we'll start going through and tighten it up. All right, so we got all of our studs in. Let's start the torque sequence on these. So we're going to do 25 foot-pounds, 50, 75, and then we'll do the studs up top. And hopefully these things stay in one piece, because these may or may not be an off-brand of ARP. I mean, they're definitely an off-brand of ARP. All of the holes were chased in the block. We're using assembly lube, so hopefully doing it the right way will buy us a little bit of luck with these overseas head studs. All right, with our cylinder heads bolted on, next thing that we are going to do is we are going to determine what length push rod we need. Now, a lot of people, when they will assemble one of these with an aftermarket cam, they will just jam the stock length push rods back in the engine. Can you get away with it? Yes, but I have an adjustable push rod length checker here. All right, for every one full rotation on this push rod, all right, you're going to add 50 thousandths of an inch. So this measures from 6-inch 800 thousandths up to 7-inch 800 thousandths. And typically, in my Camaro, I think I have 7-inch 375 thousandths push rod, which is about 25 thousandths shorter than stock. So we're going to see what this one needs. So basically, I have the rocker shaft on the cylinder head. All right, we're going to put this push rod up against the lifter. I'm going to assemble or bolt our rocker arm down, which I probably should have extended the push rod a little bit because it's entirely too short. But once we get it close, we'll basically take up 0 lash, and then we'll add about maybe a turn or so for our lifter preload, and then we can measure push rods depending upon what length. Hopefully they're stock, but they probably won't be. All right, so you can see we marked the top of our valve. All right, we basically put the rocker, the adjustable push rod in there. And what we came up with, as you can see, that's centered, all right, right on top of the head of the valve itself. All right, it's not riding on the spring or the retainer or anything like that. So it worked out in our favor. We're actually going to be able to use a stock length push rod on this. I'm going to clean out the ones that came out of this engine, and we'll put those back in. So saved a couple bucks there, but 7/400 is going to be the length for these push rods. So hopefully today we're going to get the rest of this engine buttoned up. We still have to do or install our push rods, rocker arms, and then get the tin on the engine. Now Steve is here again, spray painting our engine block.
Against my wheel.
You can't see it, but he's actually tied to the garage right now. Now, my personal belief, and it's probably one of the few things that I actually agree with Henry Ford on, but any engine block that you paint, all right, black is the only acceptable color. So clearly that's what we're going with. Where we left off with this, we were measuring for push rods, and turns out that the factory length is going to work for us. So I went through, made sure that none of the holes in the push rods were obstructed, cleaned them out, wiped them down a little bit, and they're going back in. None of them were bent or anything like that. So we have all of those in. Now we're going to start putting our rocker arms on, and then we'll go through the sequence of actually tightening these down. Now some people will just put these on and basically send them. Usually like 22 foot-pounds, I believe, is the torque spec for these. But there is a sequence and an order that you can go in, and because I'm a little neurotic, we're going to do that.
Still neurotic.
Much to Steve's dismay. Neurotic.
I think that's right. Yeah. I believe that's right.
Sounds right. I impressed
You just
myself.
spelled neurotic.
Some of these rocker bolts are actually out of the Yukon.
Yeah.
Yeah, because remember, like 2 or 3 of them were mangled, and we had to get that easy out for them. I just stole the extra ones that you had. I did ask.
I don't remember, but
I said it as I was driving down the driveway with the windows closed. I was like, "You mind if I take these?" All right, cool. So now that we went through the process of adjusting our rockers, we're going to roll this engine over just to make sure we don't have any hard spots. We don't hear anything hitting or anything like that.
I'm going to shove a piece of metal into every cylinder while you're doing that.
All right, we're going to toss our new valve cover gaskets on. Got new hardware for these as well. When we picked this engine up, some of it was missing, some of it was used in other spots. So just for peace of mind, new gaskets, new hardware. So when this thing blows up or leaks, I don't have anyone to blame but Steve. I mean myself.
All right, now I'm just going to torque down the valve covers in some
funny sequence or something, right? Is that what you want?
You know what? If it makes you happy, because I can sense the sarcasm in your voice, just tighten them down any way you want.
All right, 97 foot-pounds it is.
Yeah.
Where's the wrench?
Just go until you crack the valve cover in half.
You
Then
got a 1-inch drive wrench or something?
pack it off half a turn. Don't let Steve fool you guys. If you've watched his channel, if you haven't, you should. American Nostalgia Garage. But he's got a 72 Nova with a small block that makes well over 1,000 horsepower. So he knows his way around a torque wrench. He just enjoys giving me a hard time about using one.
Honestly, I think that's just a lot of luck. Is what it is. These should be torqued down to 25 pounds, right?
All right, so next up, we're going to be installing our front cover, balancer, and then a timing pointer from Motion Raceworks for the C5 front accessory drive. So Steve's getting that bracket and the spacers on now. Once we have that on, start driving the balancer on, and then I actually have, hopefully it's going to work, timing tape for the balancer we're about to put on so that we can actually read the timing off the balancer. If not, we're going to have to mark it with like a scribe or something, but hopefully the tape stays. So what we did is we snuck the flex plate back onto the hub on the crank because I have a tool that will bolt to the block and basically stop the engine from turning as we attempt to get this balancer installed on the block, because the torque spec is extremely high for these. I believe it's around 250 foot-pounds, although I have to look it up. So it's just about impossible, unless there was in the car, in like a stick shift car where you could put it in gear and then rip the emergency brake. If not, regardless of what you do, this thing is going to turn. So for now, we'll just toss the flex plate on there real quick. I'll get that holder on there, and that should keep it from spinning. All right, so flex plate's on, and this is the fixture that I was talking about that will bolt up to the starter location. All right, that'll stop our engine from actually turning over. And then in a minute here, we'll just tear the crank threads clean out, trying to get this thing torqued. We have the engine at top dead center. It's now locked in place. See if the guy that welded this was having a good day or not. All right, so rather than using our balancer bolt, I have a stud that's the same thread pitch. So I have that into the crank. We're going to put the balancer over it. We're replacing the factory bolt with an ARP bolt, so we'll use the washer from that, and we'll use the stud. So any of the threads that get damaged will hopefully, if they happen to eat anything up, it'll hurt the stud and not the threads in the crank.
Yeah.
So balancer is on with the help of Steve. 237 foot-pounds. That's good. We're going to flip this over and get our oil pan on. All right, so next thing we need to do is basically verify our top dead center, and then we need to adjust our timing pointer. But as you can see, where this point terminates, all right, you're not actually going to be able to see where your reading is once we put the timing tape on there. So Steve came up with a good idea. What I'm going to do is basically to eliminate this section here. All right, we're going to continue basically these two planes here, and we'll bring that up to a point, really anywhere, because we're going to determine this is adjustable, so we can move that back and forth. But to get that in the spot, because I think our timing tape is going to go on this flat portion here. All right, we're just going to shorten this point down a little bit, and that should get us in the ballpark. All right, so we modified our timing pointer. All right, what we're doing now is we are going to verify top dead center, all right, using a piston stop. So we actually undid the intake and exhaust rockers on cylinder number 1, just so the piston stop doesn't interfere with the valves. And then what we'll do is we'll actually roll the engine over until it hits the piston stop, mark our top dead center on the timing tape, we'll adjust our pointer, and then when I buy another set of timing tape because I lost the first one, then we'll apply that to the balancer, and then when we go to get this thing tuned or tune it ourselves or whatever the case may be, we can verify our timing before we launch all 8 rods and pistons that we just installed into this block out. So the reason for the tape is with the piston stop in, all right, you bring the engine around till it hits the piston stop, and then you go back around the opposite way. And then what you do is you take a measurement in between the 2 marks you made on the tape, basically divide that in half, and that gives you your true top dead center. Obviously, with the heads off, can you verify this with either a dial indicator or something similar? Yes, but right now our timing cover is on, our cylinder heads are on, so this is the next most accurate way to do it. Now the intake manifold and coil covers are just placed on there for now. We kind of wanted to see what it's going to look like. But for now, our engine is completely reassembled. Top to bottom, bearings, cam bearings, rings, gaskets, whole 9 yards. So I have a lot of confidence in this engine. Really looking forward to getting it back in the car. But for now, that's going to do it for this one. Next video on this, you will hopefully see this going back into the car, and then maybe getting some accessories on it. But thank you guys very much for watching. Again, please, if you haven't already, check out Steve's channel, American Nostalgia Garage. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you want to see this project progress, please consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll see you guys very soon.